Cathy Engelbert is no longer the commissioner of the WNBA. The quiet removal comes in the wake of a full-scale mutiny, one that started with frustration, exploded in public interviews, and turned into an unstoppable wave after Sophie Cunningham unloaded on the league's leadership. In a brutal exit interview that's already being replayed like a buzzer-beater highlight, Cunningham ripped into the league's power structure, blasting Engelbert and her team for being out of touch, unresponsive, and utterly disconnected from the reality of what players go through on the court. It wasn't just a hot take, it was an indictment. And it landed. For months, the pressure had been mounting. Caitlin Clark's arrival supercharged the league's visibility, but with that spotlight came growing discomfort. Players were getting shoved, hit, and hacked with little protection. Officiating was inconsistent to the point of absurdity, and leadership nowhere to be found. Engelbert, often praised for her business deals and polish, suddenly looked like a liability. Because when your league's brightest new star is taking cheap shots and your veterans are begging for help.
If you're here for the real story and not the filtered version, subscribe. And if you're sticking around for the next meltdown, you better definitely subscribe.
Business as usual becomes a death sentence. Sophie Cunningham didn't sugarcoat anything. "We need leadership that actually gets it," she said, pulling no punches about what's really happening behind the scenes. And she wasn't alone. Naphisha Collier echoed her fury. Lisa Leslie chimed in. Even former players and media figures like Stephen A. Smith called Engelbert out for her weak stance and empty responses. The message was clear. The players were done waiting for leadership to catch up. Engelbert's downfall wasn't a sudden collapse. It was a slow implosion. Her inability to address officiating problems, protect rising stars like Clark, or respond to a growing player safety crisis exposed a fatal flaw in the league's foundation. She wasn't leading, she was managing. And the league needed more than that. It needed someone who could actually hear its heartbeat. Once players realized their power, the situation escalated fast. Talk of a lockout during the 2026 CBA negotiations went from hypothetical to highly possible. Sponsors started watching closely. Fans grew louder, and the boardroom blinked. Now she's out, and it's not just a leadership change, it's a warning shot. This league is no longer tolerating silence, negligence, or glossy PR in place of real action. Sophie Cunningham made that very clear. With Engelbert gone, the question becomes, who has the guts to lead this league into its next era? Because the players just proved they're not afraid to tear it down to build it right. When Sophie spoke at her exit interview, it wasn't a farewell, it was a warning shot. She didn't mince words. She didn't tiptoe around the issues. She took the mic and fired off what players across the league had been too afraid or too exhausted to say for too long. The officiating? A disaster. The accountability? Non-existent. The leadership? Clueless. And when she called out Cathy Engelbert directly, she wasn't being emotional. She was being honest. That moment didn't live in isolation. It echoed. Because the truth is, this wasn't just about one voice. It was the match that lit a powder keg built from years of frustration, inconsistent standards, and a commissioner who seemed more invested in public perception than player protection. Once Sophie broke the silence, other players didn't hesitate to join in. Naphisha Collier, one of the league's most respected stars, didn't bother softening her words. She said it outright. Worst leadership in the world. That doesn't come from one bad decision. That comes from a deep-rooted, ongoing disconnect between what players are experiencing and how leadership is responding, if they're responding at all. And then Lisa Leslie added her voice. One of the greatest to ever wear a WNBA jersey. A foundational figure. She didn't criticize Engelbert just to pile on. She validated what Sophie and Naphisha were saying. She confirmed that what fans were witnessing, this growing tension between the front office and the players, wasn't overblown. It was real, and it had been building for years. Engelbert's removal was inevitable, and when it finally happened, it wasn't announced with fanfare. No farewell tour, no legacy speech, just a press release. Dry, cold, abrupt. She was out. The league called it a leadership transition, but let's not sugarcoat it. This was a clean break under pressure. And that pressure didn't come from shareholders or consultants. It came from the locker rooms, from the women who built the WNBA, from the ones tired of being ignored when it mattered and celebrated only when it was convenient. Because here's what sparked the outrage in the first place: the way Cathy Engelbert and the league handled the Caitlin Clark situation. Or rather, how they didn't handle it. Clark was the biggest rookie the league had ever seen. A generational talent who brought unprecedented ratings, ticket sales, and media coverage. She also became the target of physical play that went far beyond tough defense. And where was Engelbert? Silent. When the cameras were rolling, she talked about growth. When Clark was getting battered on the court and the officials swallowed their whistles, she had nothing to say. That silence said everything. The issue wasn't just about Clark. It was about every player. Because if the most valuable rookie in league history couldn't get protection or fairness from leadership, what hope did everyone else have? Players saw it. Fans saw it. The media saw it. And instead of stepping up, Cathy Engelbert disappeared behind vague statements and corporate jargon. That's why this wasn't just a public relations crisis. It was a governance failure, one that touched officiating, safety, and respect. The officiating had already been a problem. Inconsistencies that swung games. Missed calls that led to injuries. No transparency. No consequences. Players had raised concerns before, but they were met with indifference. Or fines. Or both. Safety, too, had become a running joke. Whether it was Clark taking unnecessary hits or other players nursing injuries from a season of unchecked contact, the league had no process in place to protect its stars. Cunningham's criticism made that crystal clear. The policies weren't working. The leadership wasn't listening. Then came the broader cultural fallout. Fans weren't just upset. They were activated. The narrative shifted quickly. Social media exploded with side-by-side video breakdowns, showing blatant no-calls and dangerous plays. Prominent voices in sports media, from Stephen A. Smith to Scott Van Pelt, took the league to task. Not just for bad calls, but for bad priorities. How could the WNBA boast about rising popularity while players were calling out systemic issues that hadn't been addressed for years? The answer: it couldn't. Sponsors started asking questions. Media partners started looking harder. And in the middle of it all, players kept speaking out. Not anonymously, not behind the scenes, out loud, on camera, in post-game pressers, on social media. By the time a lockout became part of the conversation, it wasn't a threat. It was a warning. The players were already halfway there. Cunningham's interview wasn't reckless. It was strategic. It was necessary. And most importantly, it worked. The fact that Engelbert is now out of the league proves that player voices aren't just noise, they're leverage. For the first time, the WNBA didn't just feel the pressure. It cracked under it. And now, the door is open for something new. But here's the part that matters most. The exit of Cathy Engelbert is not the finish line. It's the starting point. Because the issues that led to this moment still exist. The officiating system needs an overhaul. Player safety policies need real enforcement, not PR buzzwords. Transparency needs to be more than a promise. It needs to be a process. And most importantly, the next commissioner must understand that this league doesn't exist without its players. They aren't part of the equation. They are the equation. Moving forward, player-led governance has to be the norm. Not just for press conferences or branding moments, but in hiring, in negotiating, in every decision that affects the game on the floor. If the next era of the WNBA wants to last, it has to be built around the people who make the league what it is. The players have earned that right, not just with their performance, but with their voice. This isn't just a victory for Sophie Cunningham, or Nafisa Collier, or even Caitlin Clark. This is a turning point for every player who ever felt dismissed, every athlete who bit their tongue to avoid a fine, every voice that was told to stay quiet for the sake of the brand. They're not quiet anymore, and neither is the fan base. This isn't just about watching basketball. It's about watching change, watching players fight for the league they deserve, and seeing, finally, that it's possible. So now it's your turn. Was Engelbert's exit too little, too late? Who should step into the commissioner role next? What reforms must happen before the 2026 CBA? And do you think the league has truly learned from this? Or is this just the beginning of more battles ahead? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you're with the players, if you want to see this league rise for real, not just in press releases, hit that subscribe button. Because this isn't just a story about leadership. It's a story about taking it back. The exit interview wasn't supposed to be a moment. It was supposed to be routine. Another season in the books. A few comments about improvement. Some vague optimism for next year. But what Sophie gave was real. Unfiltered. Tired. Fed up. And completely necessary. She didn't just talk about missed calls or tough games. She exposed the rot. The kind of systemic rot that happens when leadership is more focused on media deals than player safety. When commissioners start treating locker room voices like PR liabilities. When real issues like dangerous officiating, lack of transparency, and blatant disconnect from the actual game get buried under growth metrics and highlight reels. Cathy Engelbert didn't see it coming. She should have, because this wasn't a heat-of-the-moment rant. Sophie's words were a signal flare, a public reminder that players are done waiting for the league to figure itself out, done being polite, done holding the brand together while the people at the top act like everything's under control. From there, the dam broke. Nafisa Collier took a sledgehammer to the conversation, calling the WNBA's leadership the worst in the world. That wasn't just critique. That was a statement of no confidence. It echoed in every locker room, every group chat, every sideline conversation that had for too long ended in, well, what can we do? Now, they had the answer. Speak up, loudly, publicly, together. Then came Lisa Leslie, one of the league's original giants, backing them up. And when an icon speaks, people listen. Lisa didn't say anything players hadn't been saying for years. What she did was validate it. She made it clear this wasn't just a generational issue. This was cultural, structural, long-standing. Cathy Engelbert wasn't new to the league, but she was new to the game. And that's always been the problem. She came in from corporate background, positioned as the one who would professionalize the WNBA. On paper, she delivered. Team valuations went up. Sponsorships increased. National TV deals were signed. But when it came to the court, to the grind, to the chaos of actually running a competitive league with real players and real consequences, she failed. And nowhere was that failure more obvious than in her silence during the Caitlin Clark saga. Clark didn't just bring hype. She brought pressure. A generational prospect with a tidal wave of attention and a target on her back. Every game she played was magnified. Every hit she took was scrutinized. And instead of stepping in, defending the player, clarifying the rules, demanding better officiating, Engelbert stayed quiet. She let the league spiral into a PR mess, with players like Clark absorbing not just the physical contact, but the cultural backlash too. No support, no protection, no leadership. So when Sophie Cunningham brought that up, it was personal. Because if Caitlin Clark, the biggest star the league has seen in decades, couldn't get a fair whistle or a public defense from the commissioner, what hope did anyone else have? That's when it stopped being about one player or one bad call. It became about the message. The lack of accountability wasn't just frustrating. It was dangerous. It put every player at risk. Physically, professionally. It set a precedent that the league's leadership would choose silence over action, optics over safety. And players? They've had enough of that. The warning signs were there for months. The officiating complaints. The missed fouls. The visible confusion on players' faces when calls made zero sense. The post-game quotes from coaches trying to be diplomatic while privately seething. The fines for players who dared speak up. The "we'll review it" statements that led nowhere. It all added up. And by the time Cathy Engelbert was removed from her post, there wasn't a single player surprised. There was no drawn-out goodbye. No staged legacy celebration. Just a clean break. She was gone. The league's official statement used words like transition and strategic realignment, but the reality was clear. The players pushed. And this time, the league moved. Now the spotlight shifts. This isn't just about who's leaving. It's about who's coming in. What kind of leadership does this league need now? Someone with media experience? No. Someone with business acumen? Sure, but not alone. The WNBA needs someone who gets it. someone who understands the player experience, the pace of the game, the weight of the jersey, someone who's been there, or at the very least, has stood close enough to listen. Because what the players have said, through Sophie, Nafisa, Lisa, and so many others, is that this league can't survive without trust. And Cathy Engelbert lost theirs. The next commissioner won't just be judged on TV ratings or ticket sales. They'll be judged on transparency, on fairness, on how quickly they step in when something's wrong, on whether they value the players not just as assets, but as people. And this all matters so much more now because of what's ahead, the 2026 CBA. Before Engelbert's removal, the rumblings of a lockout were getting louder. Now, they're unavoidable. Players aren't bluffing. They're preparing. Because the issues that led to this moment, safety, officiating, fair compensation, respect, have not been solved. They've just been exposed. The league has a chance now, a rare, critical window to make things right. Not with flashy press conferences or recycled talking points, but with action, with reforms, with inclusion, with consistent standards, and with leadership that doesn't just show up when the cameras are rolling. The CBA talks will be brutal if those issues aren't addressed head-on. And this time, the players are coming in with leverage, with unity, and with a fan base that has seen exactly how powerful their voices can be. This isn't the WNBA of 10 years ago. This is a new era, built by players who know their value and aren't afraid to use it. And Sophie Cunningham? She'll be remembered as the one who pulled the fire alarm. She forced the conversation. She made it clear that just being grateful to play wasn't enough. That being visible doesn't mean being respected. And that growing the game can't come at the cost of silence, fear, or burnout. This league is better because she spoke. Because Nafisa didn't hold back. Because Lisa Leslie backed them up. Because the fans listened. And because, for once, the league had to respond. The work isn't over, but the door is open. Now that Cathy Engelbert is officially out, the question isn't what went wrong. We've been living that answer all season. The real question is, what comes next? Because this isn't a clean ending, it's an open wound. This was never just about Cathy. She became the face of the failure, sure, but the rot went deeper. Her removal doesn't magically fix officiating. It doesn't erase years of player frustration. It doesn't rebuild trust overnight. All it did was confirm what the players already knew. Their power is real. And they're finally being heard. Sophie Cunningham didn't set out to lead a mutiny. She told the truth. That's what made her comments so powerful. They weren't calculated. They were cumulative. They carried the weight of a locker room that had been patient, respectful, and ignored. When she talked about the disconnect between players and league leadership, about the lack of safety, about the lies wrapped in glossy PR statements, she wasn't guessing. She was reporting live from inside the storm. And that storm had a name: systemic neglect. Nafisa Collier followed up with a kill shot, branding the league's leadership as the worst in the world. She wasn't exaggerating. She was stating the obvious. You cannot run a professional sports league where players are targeted on the court, ignored off the court, and punished for speaking out. You cannot market growth while covering up dysfunction. And you absolutely cannot let the most promising rookie the league has ever seen, Caitlin Clark, get treated like cannon fodder while your commissioner vanishes. This isn't just a Caitlin Clark problem. It's a culture problem. But Clark's visibility forced the issue into the mainstream. And when that spotlight revealed not just poor officiating, but deliberate inaction, it blew the door wide open. Lisa Leslie, a walking pillar of WNBA history, didn't mince words either. She stood behind the players. She backed their claims. She validated the call for better leadership. When legends start weighing in, the situation is beyond salvageable. It's already over. What made Engelbert's downfall inevitable wasn't just the criticism. It was her refusal to respond in any meaningful way. While players were bleeding and breaking and calling out injustices mid-season, Cathy Engelbert was nowhere to be found. When she did speak, it was vague, defensive, disconnected. That's when it became clear this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a complete breakdown in leadership philosophy. And so, the players took control. They didn't wait for league meetings. They didn't ask for permission. They used their platforms, their interviews, their post-game quotes, their social media feeds, and the fans responded. Not just because they like drama, but because they've seen it now. The officiating clips, the silence from the front office, the missteps, the power imbalance. The WNBA could no longer protect its own image while sacrificing the voices of the people who are the league. That's why Engelbert had to go. Not because one player was mad, but because every player was watching. Her exit was quiet, calculated, corporate, the kind of cold press release you get when a firing is dressed up as a transition. But make no mistake, this was a forced exit, and the credit goes entirely to the players who refused to shut up. So what now? The players are still in the middle of it. The issues they raised didn't vanish the second Cathy cleared her desk. Officiating still needs to be gutted and rebuilt. Player safety needs actual enforcement. The CBA talks are just months away, and a lockout is still very much on the table if the next leader comes in thinking they can smooth it over with buzzwords and promises. This league has one shot to get it right. The next commissioner has to be someone with basketball in their DNA. Not just business, not just media polish. They need to understand how the game feels, how it breaks your body, tests your limits, and demand your voice. Because the players have made one thing crystal clear. This is their league. They're not just employees. They're shareholders in the culture. If the next leader doesn't treat them that way, this all starts again. The power shift has already happened. Now it's about what the league does with it. Will they bring players into the decision-making room? Will they establish a transparent officiating review system? Will they take the upcoming CBA as seriously as the players are? Because there's no more hiding behind, we're growing. Growth means nothing if the foundation is cracked. So drop a comment. Who should lead the WNBA next? What's the one change you think must happen before the 2026 CBA hits? And should the players get voting power on League Matters? Hit that subscribe button because this league is transforming and we're not just watching it happen. We're watching the players run it.